In this video I want to introduce you to Gemini, which is an alternative to the web. I've already made a video about it, but in this video I want to kind of give a more conceptual overview of what it is and why you should try it out. Alright, so again, Gemini is an alternative to the web. So it replaces both HTTP, or rather HTTPS, and also replaces, in a sense, HTML. So the default kind of content that is served over Gemini is gem text, which I'll get to in a second. And the protocol is Gemini. So you replace HTTPS : / with Gemini : / Alright, so, and you might think, well, okay, but why? Why would someone do this? Like, what makes Gemini special? What differentiates it from the web? And I think the main point here about, like, to this question is restrictions. Restrictions differentiate Gemini from the web. And I want to kind of talk about these restrictions. Alright, so first up, okay, so this is not really a restriction, but rather the point is that Gemini is content focused. It focuses solely on content. What this means is that there's, for example, no client-side scripting. Like, it doesn't exist. It isn't like in the standard. Of course, you could think about writing a Gemini client which implements some side of client-side scripting, but then it's not anymore about like Gemini, but it is a superset of Gemini. So in the Gemini standard, there is no client-side scripting at all. There's also no styling. And styling with this, I mean in terms of the site owner styling their website. The styling is done by the client, so the user has full control over how things are displayed. For someone, like, when I first heard about this, I was thinking like, well, like, I don't know about this. This seems kind of very restrictive, and of course, in some sense it is, but I'll get to later on why I don't think this is that big of a deal. Alright, next up, Gemini is line-based by default, or rather gem text is line-based. So what this means is that the content is parsed by lines and not by character. This excludes, for example, the possibility of having inline links, or also having generally inline markup and styling, and I will also get to this further down the road. Alright, so what this means, and that, like, I haven't gotten into like many more restrictions. These are just some very major ones, I think. But there's also stuff like there's only one request type. Like, there's only one type of request you can send to a Gemini server, and that is with one URL. You do have, for example, the ability to send like data to a Gemini server. So to have, for example, what you would call in normal HTTP, you would call like query links and something like this. But like that's it. That's all you get. And again, a lot more stuff. So what this all means is that Gemini is lighter, more minimal, and in the end freer than the web. And if you have seen my video, which was titled Freedom Through Restriction, I think you kind of already know what I'm getting at with this. Because, and you have the thumbnail, because if we think about Gemini and the web, we can say, well, really, the web is this big box right here. So the web is really maximalist. It can do pretty much everything. You can run an operating system in your web browser and stuff like this. So the web is really maximalist, but it's so huge and so complex that you as a normal user, or even you as a developer, can only really understand like tiny fractions of it. So these kind of small black rectangles in it. While Gemini is so minimal, it's so restrictive that you can actually understand the whole thing. If you just read through the standard, you will know everything there is about Gemini, about the protocol, and also about gem text. And this gives you a lot of power and a lot of freedom because you are in full control. So, and to kind of highlight this point, like, try writing a web browser. It's impossible. It's impossible for a single person, or practically impossible for a single person, to write a full-fledged, full-featured web browser. It's not possible because that's just too much complexity. It's just too much. There's too much stuff you have to think about. So only huge organizations and huge companies, like for example Mozilla, Mozilla, Google, and you can also say, well, and this, let me also say this is not about profit. This is not about like commerciality, you could say. So if you have heard about the Ladybird web browser, this is of course a non-profit project. But still, the point is that you have to have a huge organization. And okay, Ladybird is not that huge, but still, what I want to say is, for an individual, it's impossible, practically impossible to write a full-featured web browser. But try writing a Gemini client. This is actually, well, I don't want to say trivial, but it is pretty easy, because through this restrictiveness, again, you can understand the entire protocol. You can understand the entire stack of this protocol, and thus are able to write a client pretty easily. And this is the reason why there are so many clients. And this is also the reason why I said earlier that the point about styling is not that much of a deal. I think at least, because you can, if you are really dedicated and you're really passionate about, for example, some certain type of styling, you can write your own client. And I have thought about doing this, and I might actually do this, because one thing that really annoys me is, you might roll your eyes, is like left-aligned text. If I'm reading text and the text is only left-aligned and not justified, so the difference is with left-aligned text you have like a ragged right side, so the lines are not right-aligned, and with justified text you have both of them justified. So justified means that they are both left and right aligned. So you have two even sides. I hope you know what I mean. So, and this really annoys me when reading like longer pieces of text. So I have thought about actually writing a Gemini client too, to fix that. All right. Now, I also want to get into like two questions, or a few questions. So why not simply use a subset of HTML and of HTTPS? Why not simply do that? Why specify something new? Well, one reason is, of course, that it's very hard to agree on a subset of anything, really. It's very hard to take something maximalist and kind of strip it down. And I mean, you can think about anything, really. Like what project can you think of that was in a certain sense maximalist and which was then stripped down? That doesn't really happen. At least I don't think it does. What's way better is to build stuff up from the ground, because then you don't have to think about, well, which things are we going to keep and which are we going to throw out, but rather about, okay, how can we intelligently construct this thing to actually like facilitate what we want to achieve. And this is what has happened with Gemini. The protocol is very elegant, I think, and very minimal, and this would not have been possible with HTML. You would have to kind of fight against the maximalist nature of HTML, and I wrote here HTML, but I also mean HTTPS or HTTP. So this is, I think, kind of the reason for this. Also, no inline markup. This is, of course, also, this seems like a deal breaker. This seems like a big thing. Well, I can't have italic text. Oh no. I can't have inline links, but links need to be on a new line. Oh no, how terrible. But again, I think with this, it's kind of, there's a kind of rabbit hole you have to then go down with when you choose to have inline markup. First up, every client needs to pass, or to parse rather, the content character by character. This is a huge complexity because, for example, with italic, let's think about italic in or bold text. You have like, if you think about markup, you specify bold text by stars. So the first star starts the bold text, the second star ends the bold text. Well, then you need to have state when you're passing the text. Again, you need to pass character by character. And it's just a huge complexity. You have different types of, well, we have bold, we have italic, we have like 7 other different things of inline markup and so on and so forth. So there's really a rabbit hole you go down, which is kind of, yeah, where do you stop is the question. And with styling, it is really the same thing. Like, where do you stop? Like, there is no natural point at which to stop. You know what I mean? So if you decide, okay, we're going to do inline markup, we're going to do styling, you, in a certain sense, at the end, have to end up at a maximalist set, if that makes sense. And I think, so this is kind of my approach to it. When I think of styling, I think of, okay, first up, either writing my own client, of course, but also, okay, if I really want to have something exactly how I want it to look, I can just, for example, format a PDF or a EPUB file or use some other format which allows me to have this styling, to have the control I want over the aesthetics of what I want to share. So this, I think, is the real solution to this, to not trying to force something onto a protocol that's like meant to be minimalist, or that's meant to be lightweight. And again, you can also, I don't think I mentioned that in the beginning, you can still serve any type of file over the Gemini protocol. It is not restricted to it's not restricted to gem text, just as HTTPS is not restricted to HTML. You can serve a PDF over Gemini just as well as you can serve HTML over Gemini, even though that wouldn't make much sense, but so yeah. And you can also serve, of course, Markdown over Gemini, for example. All right, so to conclude this video, I think Gemini is really cool. I think Gemini solves a lot of the issues with the normal web. It actually gives you a calmer browsing experience, I found, because you don't have to worry about things being annoying. You don't have to, for example, you don't have to worry about if you click on some link and you notice phenomenon, you click on some link and then you're like forwarded to 20 different spam sites and you end up on some site that's totally bloated and has like some advertising for some casino or for some like explicit content or whatnot. This kind of stuff that can't happen with Gemini. Like, it just can't. It also, for example, one restriction I didn't mention, it doesn't have inline images. I mean, HTML doesn't have inline images as well. It just links to images, and the standard is to include those images, like the HTML standard is to include those images within the page. But with Gemini, or with Gemtext rather, there's no such standard. So Gemini clients typically don't include images inline, which is also very nice because then you are not flashed with some image that you maybe don't want to see. The point is, you as the user have more control. And I also think if you publish something on Gemini, I think you also, in a sense, have more control because you're more restricted. You are forced to focus more on what you actually want to say, if that makes sense. All right, so I think that's it. I've already made a video on Gemini and a Gemini client that is written in shell script, in POSIX compliant shell script, under 100 lines. You can watch that if you care about this stuff. I will also make a video on actually hosting a Gemini site, and I will also host my own Gemini site, of course, or Gemini capsule, I think is the term. And yeah, I might also do a video on a more graphical client. But if you go to geminiprotocol.net, and I will link this in the description and on my website, you can go to the software section, and there are Gemini clients for pretty much every software, pretty much every platform you can think of. And I may also do a video where I go through the Gemini protocol, because again, it's really, really clean and nice. All right, so that's it. Have a nice day.